Excalibur is the legendary sword of King Arthur. Sometimes attributed with magical powers or associated with the rightful sovereignty of Great Britain. The best-known version of the story of the sword depicts the wizard Merlin thrusting the as-yet unnamed sword into a huge stone, saying that the throne will be claimed by the one who was able to withdraw it. Young Arthur would later prove to be the one to do it. The second story has Arthur obtaining the sword named as Excalibur at a magical lake, where it is given to him by the mysterious Lady of the Lake. Beginning with Sir Thomas Malory's version of the story, the sword in the stone and Excalibur became identified as the same weapon. The sword, made by an elf of Avalon, was later stolen by Arthur's half-sister Morgan Le Fay, at which time its magical healing scabbard was lost, although Arthur recovered the sword itself. In the Battle of Camlan, Arthur was mortally wounded. As he lay dying, he told his companion Sir Bedivere to return the sword to the lake. When Bedivere did so, an arm rose from the lake to catch the sword, brandishing it 3 times before it disappeared beneath the waters. The first surviving account of Arthur's kingly sword is the sword in the stone legend, originally appearing in Robert de Boron's French poem, Merlin. In this, which would become the most famous version of the story of how Arthur came to obtain the sword, the wizard Merlin has placed the sword into a huge stone, declaring that only the true heir of Uther Pendragon could reclaim it. Several warriors attempt the task, but it can only be withdrawn by the true king, the divinely appointed king and true heir to the throne. In the midst of a national crisis, the young Arthur withdraws the sword and soon becomes king. The second version comes from the later Suite du Merlin, part of the post-Vulgate cycle of French Arthurian literature of the early 13th century, which like the legend of the sword in the stone was taken up by Malory in his famous English-language version. Here, Arthur receives this sword from the Lady of the Lake after breaking his earlier sword in a fight with King Pellinore. The Lady of the Lake calls this sword Excalibur, as to say, cut steel, and Arthur takes it from a hand rising out of the lake. In the Suite du Merlin following the Battle of Bengrain, Arthur agreed to a peace treaty with King Lot along with the other rebel kings. At this time, Arthur met King Lot's wife, Morgause, and fell in love and slept with her, resulting in the birth of a child, Mordred. However, Arthur had unknowingly committed incest because Morgause was actually his half-sister. He did not discover this fact until Merlin later rebuked him for his succumbing to lust. Merlin prophesied that Mordred would one day mortally wound his father, destroy his knights, and bring about the downfall of his kingdom. Arthur also had a half-sister, Morgan Le Fay, a sorceress, who loathed her sibling and used a wide range of powers to attack him many times. Arthurian mythology occasionally states that it was Morgan Le Fay who seduced Arthur, producing the evil Mordred. However, it is more traditional for Morgause, another sister, to be Mordred's mother. In these classics, Mordred frequently appears as her pawn, helping to bring about the end of Camelot. Morgan Le Fay is described as stealing Excalibur's magical scabbard, thus reducing Arthur to a vulnerable mortal during battle. As Arthur lies dying at the end of the saga, he tells Sir Bedivere to return his sword to the lake by throwing it into the water. Bedivere is reluctant to throw away such a precious artifact, so twice he only pretends to do so. Each time, Arthur asks him to describe what he saw. When Bedivere tells him the sword simply fell into the water, Arthur scolds him harshly. Finally, Bedivere throws Excalibur into the lake. Before the sword strikes the water surface, a hand reaches up to grasp it and pulls it under. Arthur then leaves on a death barge with 3 queens to the magical island of Avalon, from where he will one day return to rule in Britain's darkest hour. Malory records both versions of the legend in his Le Morte d'Arthur, and confusingly calls both swords Excalibur. In a recent version of the story presented in the film Excalibur, the divergent legends are reconciled as which Arthur draws the sword from the stone and later breaks it, and the Lady of the Lake then repairs it and returns